First of all, the Bible isn't corrupted. Bible was never corrupted. The corrupted thing, the only corrupted thing, is the followers of Jesus. They misinterpreted Bible and they claim Jesus as the Son of God. Jesus never claimed that he was the Son of God. You don't believe me? You read, you reread, reread. Read it 1,000 times, and you tell me which verse in Bible are saying that Jesus himself claimed himself as a Son of God. That is the only corrupted thing inside the Christian's mind. Other than that, they are no different than us.
In the Muslim dreamscape, Jesus was born of the Virgin Mary and became a great prophet who was the forerunner of Muhammad, who admonished his followers to worship and love only one God. It was only later Christians, they claim, like the heretic Paul, that corrupted this message and created a very different religion and a very different idea about Jesus. Amazingly enough, many of them will actually quote the Bible and try to claim that the Bible itself sustains this idea about Jesus. Well, while it is true that the Bible is a deeply self-contradictory book, featuring a muddled and confusing idea about Jesus, and it is also true that there were a great many different Christianities back then that had different ideas about Jesus, it is not true that any of these early Christianities could be considered to be proto-Islamic or were especially compatible with Islamic theology. Muslims would be well advised to put down the Bible. Whether you are arguing with a Christian or an atheist, anyone with an even casual understanding of the Bible will hand your butt to you, as I'm about to do so. Okay, I don't have time to reread all four Gospels to you, which I pretty much have to do if I had to sum up every single verse where Jesus claimed to be God, the Son of God, was forgiving sins as only Allah can, or talking about when he'd be sitting in judgment of people, and so on and so forth. Let me just read a couple highlights. First, we have the Gospel of Mark, which was the first of the Gospels that was written. And it says in chapter 1, verse 1, the beginning of the Gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Well, that pretty much almost establishes in the subhead what we're talking about here. We're hitting the ground running. Then it talks about the baptism by John the Baptist, and it says in chapter 1, verse 10, and straightway coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens opened, and the Spirit like a dove descending upon him. And there came a voice from heaven saying, Thou art my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. And towards the end of the Gospel, in chapter 14, verse 61, the high priest asked him, and said unto him, Art thou the Christ, the Son of the Blessed, blessed with a capital B? And in verse 62, Jesus said, I am, and ye shall see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. In the Gospel of Matthew, it says in chapter 9, verse 2, And behold, they brought him a man sick of the palsy, lying on bed. And Jesus, seeing their faith, and said unto the sick of the palsy, Son, be of good cheer, thy sins be forgiven thee. Well, of course, Muslims believe that only Allah can forgive sins, and the Pharisees seem to agree with that. In verse 3, And behold, certain of the scribes said within themselves, This man blasphemeth. And Jesus said, knowing their thoughts, Wherefore think ye evil in your hearts? For whether it is easier to say, Thy sins be forgiven thee, or to say, Arise and walk. But that ye may know that the Son of Man hath the power on earth to forgive sins. Then said he to the sick of the palsy, Arise, take up thy bed, and go into thine house. And he arose and departed into his house. In Matthew chapter 17, Jesus has his transfiguration moment on top of a mountain with 3 disciples. And it says in verse 5, Where while he spake, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and the voice of the cloud, which said, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased, hear ye him. And then Jesus describes the Eucharist in chapter 26, verse 27 and 28. Then he took the cup and gave thanks, and gave it to them, saying, Drink ye all of it, for this is my blood of the New Testament, which is shed for the remission of sins. Not exactly consistent with the whole Muslim idea of salvation. Moving on to the Gospel of Luke. It says in chapter 1, verse 31 and 32, where Gabriel is talking to Mary about the Immaculate Conception. And behold, thou shalt conceive in thy womb, and thou shalt bring forth a son, and shalt call him Jesus. He shall be great. He shall be called the Son of the Highest. Highest with a capital H. So Gabriel is establishing that he's the Son of God here. Then in chapter 2, verse 49, he said unto them, How is it ye sought me? They were looking for, Joseph and Mary were looking for him because they had lost him, the 12-year-old Jesus. And he said, How is it ye sought me? Wist ye not that I must be about my Father's business? Translation, duh, Mom, where'd you think I was? But he's talking about his Father's business, preaching in the temple. He's not talking about his father Joseph, he's talking about his heavenly Father. And then finally, in Luke chapter 23, verse 46, his last words on the cross, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. And then there's the Gospel of John, which is the most Trinitarian of all the Gospels. It says in chapter 1, verse 1, the Word was God. And then it says in verse 14, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. So it's talking about Jesus being God incarnate. And Jesus confirms this. In chapter 10, verse 30, Jesus says, I and my Father are one. And it says in John chapter 14, verse 6, this is a famous verse here, Jesus say unto them, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. And finally, the Doubting Thomas story, where the Doubting Thomas sees the resurrected Jesus, and he says to him, My Lord and my God. And Jesus said unto him, in verse 29, he does not say, No, I am not your God. He instead says, Thomas, because thou hast seen me, thou hast believed. Blessed are they that have not seen, and yet have believed. So Jesus is confirming what Thomas said when he called Jesus God. So here's the problem for Muslims. You can't use the Bible to confirm your ideas about Jesus. You pretty much have to do to the New Testament what the Marcionites did to the Old Testament, and that is throw it out completely. But the problem is, if you throw it out completely, you've basically thrown out every single detailed account we have of the life of Jesus and his teachings. Essentially, what you're doing here is you're saying Jesus is a great prophet. Well, okay, but where's the prophecy? Where are his teachings? Where is his message? Because all of that is lost. Furthermore, to take your story seriously about the Muslim Jesus, that he came preaching a word of Allah, and he was the forerunner of Muhammad, and taught people to obey the one true God, and so forth. And first the Jews crucify him, and then a contemporary of his, Paul, Jesus is barely gone, when this guy Paul is teaching that Jesus is the intercessor between us and the divine, and that Jesus is God, and so forth. I could not possibly imagine a more dramatic, catastrophic, epic failure by any prophet of a God that is so jealous, so demanding of attention, so obsessed with idolatry as the Judeo-Christian Islamic God. I mean, really, I cannot think of a more worst-case scenario for any prophet. First, he gets crucified and rejected. Then, he's worshipped. How could it possibly have been more of a failure? So, Muslims, you're calling Jesus a great prophet. Either you have to go back on that and admit Jesus was a total failure as a prophet, or you have to say that Islam is a lie. It really can't be both here. And if it can, if I'm missing something, you tell me what it is. Over to you.